On the set of Sabrina, Audrey Hepburn cried in silence. Bogart's reaction stunned everyone present. It was the autumn of 1953. The Paramount lot stretched under a grey October sky, and somewhere between Soundstage 5 and the costume department, a 24-year-old woman sat alone on a wooden crate. Her slender frame folded inward, her hands pressed against her face. She made no sound. The tears fell without permission, without witnesses, or so she believed. Her name was Audrey Hepburn, and in that moment, she was not the rising star the world had begun to celebrate. She was simply a young woman, carrying a weight too heavy for her shoulders. The production of Sabrina had been troubled from the start. Billy Wilder, the director, was brilliant but demanding. William Holden, her co-star, had become emotionally attached to her in ways that complicated everything. And then there was Humphrey Bogart, the legend, the icon, the man who had made it clear from day one that he did not want to be there. Bogart had not been the first choice for the role of Linus Larrabee. Cary Grant had turned it down. So had several others. When Bogart finally accepted, he arrived on set with a chip on his shoulder the size of the Hollywood sign. He felt like a replacement, a second option. And Humphrey Bogart was not a man who tolerated being anyone's second choice. He barely spoke to Audrey during the first weeks of filming. When he did, his words were clipped, professional, distant. He watched her rehearse with Holden, watched the way the crew fawned over her, watched the way Wilder treated her like fragile porcelain, and something in him resented it. Not her, exactly, but the situation, the politics, the feeling that he was on the outside of something he could not name. But what no one knew, what Bogart himself did not yet understand, was that beneath his gruff exterior, he was paying attention. More attention than anyone realized. He noticed the way Audrey's hands trembled before difficult scenes. He noticed the dark circles under her eyes that makeup could not fully hide. He noticed the way she smiled at everyone, always, even when her voice wavered. And he noticed, on that October afternoon, the way she slipped away from the set the moment Wilder called for a break. He followed her, not out of curiosity, not out of concern, at least not consciously. He followed her because something in his gut told him to, and Humphrey Bogart had learned over 54 years of living to trust his gut. He found her behind the costume warehouse, sitting on that wooden crate, crying without making a sound. The silence of her grief struck him harder than any sob could have. He had seen women cry before, in films, in life, in the aftermath of arguments and betrayals, but this was different. This was someone trying to disappear inside her own pain. He stood there for a long moment, unsure what to do. Humphrey Bogart was not a man who comforted. He was not a man who offered soft words or tender gestures. He had built his career on playing tough guys, cynics, men who kept the world at arm's length, and in many ways that was not an act. That was who he was. But something shifted in him that afternoon. Something cracked open. He walked toward her slowly, his footsteps loud enough to announce his presence, but not so loud as to startle. She looked up, and for a moment her eyes went wide with panic, the panic of someone caught in a private moment of weakness. She wiped her face quickly, tried to compose herself, tried to summon the grace that had become her trademark. But before she could speak, before she could apologize or explain or pretend that everything was fine, Bogart did something that no one on that set would have predicted. He sat down beside her, not across from her, not at a safe distance. He sat right there, on the edge of that wooden crate, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. And then he said nothing. For 5 full minutes, Humphrey Bogart sat in silence beside Audrey Hepburn while she cried. He did not ask what was wrong. He did not offer advice. He did not try to fix anything. He simply sat there, present, solid, refusing to leave. When her tears finally slowed, when her breathing steadied, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a handkerchief. It was old, slightly wrinkled, slightly, monogrammed with his initials. He handed it to her without a word. She took it. She pressed it to her eyes, and when she finally looked at him, really looked at him, she saw something in his face that she had never seen before. Not sympathy, not pity, something deeper, something that said, "I know, I understand. You are not alone." What happened next would change the entire trajectory of their relationship, and in many ways the trajectory of the film itself. Bogart cleared his throat. His voice, when it came, was low and rough, like gravel wrapped in velvet. "You know," he said, "I spent the first 3 weeks of this picture convinced you were just another pretty face, another ingenue who got lucky, another flavor of the month." Audrey said nothing. She simply listened. "I was wrong," Bogart continued. "I've been wrong about a lot of things in my life, but I was especially wrong about you." He paused, and in that pause, the weight of his words settled between them. "You've got something, kid. Something real. Something that can't be taught or bought or faked, and whatever's making you cry right now, whatever's eating at you, it's not going to win. Because people like you, people with that kind of fire inside them, they don't break. They bend, but they don't break." Audrey's eyes filled with fresh tears. But these were different. These were tears of release, of recognition, of being seen by someone she had assumed could not see her at all. "I didn't think you liked me," she whispered. Bogart laughed, a short, gruff sound that carried no mockery. "I don't like anyone," he said. "Ask my wife, ask anyone who's ever worked with me. But that doesn't mean I can't respect someone. And kid, I respect you, more than you know." He stood up, brushed off his trousers, and looked down at her with an expression that was almost tender. "Now dry your eyes, fix your makeup, and get back to set. We've got a picture to make, and I'll be damned if I'm going to let Billy Wilder see me being soft." He turned to walk away, but Audrey's voice stopped him. "Mr. Bogart." He paused, looked back over his shoulder. "Thank you," she said, "for sitting with me, for not asking questions, for just being here." Bogart nodded once, a single sharp movement. "That's what you do," he said. "When someone's hurting, you show up. You don't have to say anything. You just show up." And then he was gone, disappearing around the corner of the warehouse, leaving Audrey alone with his handkerchief pressed against her heart. She kept that handkerchief for the rest of her life. Check if you are already subscribed to this channel. Stories like this remind us that behind every legend, there is a human being capable of quiet kindness. Subscribe now, so you never miss another moment that reveals the true character of the icons we thought we knew. Chapter 2. The days that followed that October afternoon were different. Everyone on set noticed it, though no one could quite explain it. Humphrey Bogart was still gruff. He still complained about the script. He still argued with Billy Wilder about line readings and camera angles and the temperature of his coffee. But something in his demeanor had shifted, especially when it came to Audrey. He began to watch out for her in small ways. When the lighting crew took too long setting up a shot, and Audrey stood shivering in her thin costume, Bogart would bark at someone to bring her a coat. When William Holden lingered too long in her dressing room, Bogart would find a reason to interrupt. A question about the next scene, a comment about the call sheet, anything to give her an exit. He never explained these interventions. He never acknowledged them. If anyone asked, he would have denied they meant anything at all. But Audrey knew, and she began to understand that Humphrey Bogart's gruffness was not cruelty. It was armor. Armor that he had been wearing for so long. He had almost forgotten what was underneath. The production of Sabrina was grueling. Billy Wilder was a perfectionist who demanded take after take, often changing dialogue on the fly, often pushing his actors to the edge of exhaustion. Audrey, despite her talent, was still relatively inexperienced. She had won an Academy Award for Roman Holiday just months before, but that success had not prepared her for the particular pressures of working with Wilder. He was not unkind to her, exactly, but he was demanding in ways that left her doubting herself. Every note he gave felt like a criticism. Every revision to the script felt like an indictment of her performance. And though she never complained, never pushed back, the strain was visible in the hollows beneath her cheekbones, in the way her laugh became slightly too bright, slightly too forced. Bogart saw all of it, and though he was not a man given to intervention, he began to intervene in his own way. One afternoon during a particularly difficult scene between Audrey and William Holden, Wilder called for the 15th take. Audrey's voice was hoarse. Her eyes were red from the strain of producing tears on command. And Holden, who had his own complicated feelings about the situation, was becoming visibly frustrated. Bogart was not in the scene. He was standing off to the side, watching, waiting for his next setup, but when Wilder called cut and began to launch into another round of notes, Bogart stepped forward. "Billy," he said, his voice cutting through the chaos of the set. "Give the kid a break." Wilder turned, surprised. Bogart rarely involved himself in scenes he was not part of. He rarely involved himself in anything that did not directly concern him. "She's fine," Wilder said, waving his hand dismissively. "We're close. One more take." "She's not fine," Bogart said. "Bogart, she's exhausted, and you're not going to get what you want from her if you run her into the ground." The set went silent. Crew members exchanged glances. William Holden looked down at his shoes, and Audrey stared at Bogart with an expression that was equal parts gratitude and disbelief. Wilder's eyes narrowed. He was not a man who appreciated being challenged, especially on his own set. but he was also not a fool. He knew Bogart's reputation. He knew that pushing back too hard could turn a difficult production into an impossible one. "Fine," Wilder said after a long pause. 15 minutes. "But when we come back, I want perfection." He walked away, muttering something under his breath about temperamental actors and impossible schedules. But Audrey did not hear him. She was looking at Bogart, who had already turned away, who was already lighting a cigarette, as if nothing had happened. She approached him slowly, unsure what to say. "You didn't have to do that," she said quietly. Bogart shrugged. "Someone had to. Wilder's brilliant, but he forgets that actors are human beings, not machines. He's going to be angry with you. He's always angry with me. It's part of our charm." Audrey smiled, a real smile, the first one that had reached her eyes in days. "Why are you being so kind to me?" she asked. "After everything, after the way things started between us?" Bogart took a long drag of his cigarette, exhaled slowly. "Because I've been where you are," he said, "more times than I can count, and I remember what it felt like to have no one in my corner, to feel like I was drowning and everyone around me was too busy to notice." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and for a moment the armor fell away completely. "You're going to be one of the great ones, Audrey. I've been in this business long enough to know, but being great comes at a price. And if you're not careful, that price will eat you alive." He flicked his cigarette away, ground it out with his heel. "So take care of yourself, kid, because this industry won't do it for you. And the people who love you, they need you to come home in one piece." He walked away before she could respond, leaving her standing there with tears threatening to fall again. But this time, they were tears of something other than exhaustion. They were tears of recognition, of being understood by someone she had least expected to understand. That evening, after the day's shooting had wrapped, Audrey found a small package outside her dressing room door. Inside was a bottle of expensive champagne and a handwritten note. The note read, "For the days when you need to celebrate yourself because no one else will remember to do it. HB." She kept that note in her diary for the rest of her life. Chapter 3. The relationship between Audrey Hepburn and Humphrey Bogart continued to evolve over the remaining weeks of production. What had begun as indifference had transformed into something rare in Hollywood, a genuine friendship between two people who had nothing to gain from each other except the comfort of authentic connection. They began to take their lunch breaks together, sitting in a quiet corner of the commissary, while the rest of the cast and crew buzzed around them. Their conversations were not about the film, they were about life, about the strange, disorienting experience of fame, about the loneliness that came with being watched by millions of strangers, about the pressure to be perfect when perfection was impossible. Bogart talked about his early years in Hollywood. The failures and rejections that had nearly broken him before The Maltese Falcon changed everything. He talked about his marriages, the ones that had ended in disaster, and the one that had finally taught him what love could be. He talked about Lauren Bacall, his wife, with a tenderness that surprised Audrey. She had expected cynicism. She found devotion instead. "Betty saved my life," he told her one afternoon, using Bacall's real name with easy intimacy. "Not literally, but in every way that matters. I was heading down a dark road when I met her, drinking too much, fighting everyone who tried to help. Convinced that I was destined to burn out before I ever made it." He paused, staring at the coffee cup in his hands. "She saw something in me that I couldn't see in myself, and she refused to let me destroy it. That's what love is, kid. Not the fairy tale stuff they put in movies. Real love is someone who sees your worst parts and stays anyway. Someone who fights for you even when you're too tired to fight for yourself." Audrey listened, absorbing every word. She was young, still learning the shape of her own heart, still trying to understand what she wanted from life beyond the glitter of stardom. "How do you know?" she asked. "How do you know when it's real?" Bogart smiled, a rare, unguarded smile that softened his weathered face. "You know because it doesn't feel like a movie. It feels like work, hard work, every single day. But you do it anyway, because the alternative, living without that person, is worse than any argument, any struggle, any dark night of the soul." He looked at her, and his eyes held something ancient and knowing. "You'll find it, Audrey, or it'll find you. Just make sure when it comes you're brave enough to hold on." It was during one of these lunch conversations that Audrey finally told Bogart the truth about what had made her cry that October afternoon. She had received news from Europe, news about her past, about her family, about things that had happened during the war years that she had spent her whole life trying to forget. The memories had come flooding back, triggered by something small, a phrase in the script, a particular slant of light, the smell of autumn leaves through an open window. She did not go into details. Some wounds were too deep to describe, but she told him enough for him to understand that her pain was not about the film, not about the pressures of stardom, not about the complicated dynamics on set. Her pain was older than all of that, deeper, woven into the very fabric of who she was. Bogart listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "You know what I've learned about pain, kid? It never goes away. Not completely, but it doesn't have to own you either. You take it and you turn it into something. Something beautiful, something that helps other people who are carrying the same weight." He gestured around them, at the soundstage, at the cameras and lights and chaos of the film industry. All of this, it's just a way of telling stories. And stories are how we make sense of the things that don't make sense. The things that hurt too much to face head on. You put it in the work. You let the work carry what you can't carry alone. Audrey's eyes filled with tears. But this time, she did not try to hide them. "Is that what you do?" she asked. "Every damn day," Bogart said. "Every role I play, every scene I shoot, there's a piece of me in there. The angry parts, the sad parts, the parts I'm not proud of, I give them to the characters and somehow it makes them easier to live with." He reached across the table and, in a gesture that would have shocked anyone who knew his reputation, took her hand. "You're not alone in this, Audrey. Whatever you're carrying, whatever you've been through, you're not alone. And anyone who tries to tell you that you have to suffer in silence is lying. We all need someone to sit with us in the dark. If this moment touched you, if you felt something stir in your chest, leave a comment saying, 'We all need someone to sit with us in the dark.' Let me know you understand. Let me know you feel it too." Audrey squeezed his hand, and in that squeeze was everything she could not say. Gratitude, recognition, the profound relief of being understood. Chapter 4. As the production of Sabrina moved into its final weeks, the atmosphere on set began to shift. The tensions that had plagued the early days faded, replaced by a kind of weary camaraderie that often develops when people have been through something difficult together. Billy Wilder, for all his demanding perfectionism, had begun to see what Bogart saw in Audrey, that rare combination of vulnerability and strength that would make her one of the most beloved actresses of her generation. He softened toward her, though he would never admit it. His notes became less cutting, his demands became less impossible, and when she delivered a take that moved him, he would nod almost imperceptibly, the highest praise a Wilder actor could hope for. William Holden, whose feelings for Audrey had complicated everything, had begun to accept that whatever existed between them could not survive beyond the boundaries of the film. He was married. She was young, still finding her way, and though the attraction was real, they both understood that acting on it would only lead to pain. Holden handled this realization with surprising grace. He remained professional on set, delivered his performances with the charm and warmth that had made him a star, and kept his distance when the cameras stopped rolling. Audrey appreciated his restraint, even as part of her mourned what might have been. But it was Bogart who had become her anchor. Not romantically. There was never anything between them but friendship. But emotionally, spiritually, in all the ways that mattered most, he continued to watch out for her, continued to intervene when the pressures became too much, continued to offer his gruff wisdom in moments when she needed it most. And she, in turn, had begun to draw him out of his shell, to coax laughter from him when he was determined to be sullen, to remind him that there was joy to be found even in the midst of chaos. One evening, after a particularly long day of shooting, Bogart invited Audrey to join him and Lauren Bacall for dinner at their home. It was an unusual invitation. Bogart was famously private, rarely allowing his work life to intersect with his home life. But something about Audrey had earned his trust. Something about her had made her feel like family. The Bogart home was warm and unpretentious, filled with books and photographs and the comfortable clutter of a life well lived. Lauren Bacall greeted Audrey at the door with a hug and a glass of wine, immediately putting her at ease. "I've heard so much about you," Bacall said, her voice carrying that distinctive smoky quality that had made her famous. "Bogey doesn't talk about his co-stars, ever, but he talks about you." Audrey blushed. "Only good things, I hope." Bacall laughed. "With Bogey, that's the only kind of talking he does. He saves the criticism for the people he doesn't respect." The evening unfolded with an ease that surprised Audrey. She had expected formality, perhaps even awkwardness. Instead, she found warmth, laughter, genuine connection. Bogart and Bacall were clearly devoted to each other, their banter quick and affectionate, their glances carrying entire conversations. At one point, while Bacall was in the kitchen preparing dessert, Bogart turned to Audrey with an expression she could not quite read. "I want you to know something," he said, "and I'm only going to say this once, because I'm not good at this kind of thing." Audrey waited, her heart suddenly beating faster. "You reminded me of something I'd forgotten," Bogart said. "Something important. That this business, for all its nonsense and politics and ego, it's still about people. Real people with real feelings who are just trying to make something beautiful." He paused, seeming to struggle with the words. "I came into Sabrina angry, feeling like I didn't belong, feeling like everyone was against me. And you didn't do anything except be yourself. Be kind, be genuine, and somehow that was enough to change everything." Audrey felt tears prickling at her eyes again. She seemed to cry more around Bogart than she had in years. "You changed things for me too," she said. "That day behind the warehouse, I was ready to quit. Not just the film, everything. I felt so alone, so overwhelmed, so convinced that I wasn't strong enough for any of this." She took a shaky breath. "And then you sat down beside me. You didn't try to fix anything, you just sat there. And somehow that was the most healing thing anyone had ever done for me." Bogart nodded, uncomfortable with the emotion, but unwilling to retreat from it. "That's the thing about strength," he said. "People think it means never breaking. But real strength is breaking and getting back up. It's asking for help when you need it. It's letting someone see you at your worst and trusting that they'll still be there at your best." He raised his glass. "To strength, kid. The real kind." Audrey raised her glass in return. To strength. Chapter 5. Sabrina wrapped principal photography in late November of 1953. The final day of shooting was bittersweet. Relief at reaching the end, sadness at saying goodbye to people who had become important. Audrey spent the morning in her trailer, carefully packing the belongings that had accumulated over months of filming. Among them was Bogart's handkerchief, which she had washed and pressed and now kept in a small silk pouch. She would never return it. It had become a talisman, a reminder of the day when a gruff legend had shown her unexpected kindness. The final scene they shot was not between Audrey and Bogart. It was a simple cutaway, a reaction shot that would be edited into an earlier sequence. But after Billy Wilder called "That's a wrap," and the applause echoed through the soundstage, Bogart sought Audrey out. He found her standing near the set of the Larrabee garage, looking at the fake trees and painted backdrops that had become so familiar over the past months. "End of an era, kid," he said, coming to stand beside her. "It doesn't feel real," she replied. "After everything, and all the struggles, all the long days, it's strange to think it's actually over." "That's the thing about making movies," Bogart said. "You pour everything you have into them. You live inside them for months, and then one day they're done, and you have to figure out who you are again without them." Audrey nodded slowly. She understood exactly what he meant. "Will we stay in touch?" she asked, and there was something vulnerable in the question, a fear that the friendship they had built would fade once the structure of production no longer held them together. Bogart turned to look at her, and his expression was serious. "I don't make promises lightly," he said. "You know that by now, but I'm making one now. You've got a friend in me, Audrey. Today, tomorrow, for as long as I'm around. Whenever you need someone to sit with you in the dark, you call. I'll be there." Audrey felt her throat tighten. She reached out and took his hand, and something she never would have dared to do at the beginning of production, but something that felt completely natural now. "Thank you," she said, "for everything. For seeing me when I felt invisible. For standing up for me when I couldn't stand up for myself. For teaching me what real strength looks like." Bogart squeezed her hand once, then released it. "You never needed teaching," he said. "You just needed reminding. There's a difference." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box which he handed to her. "A wrap gift," he said. "Don't open it until you get home." Audrey took the box, feeling its weight in her palm. She wanted to protest. Wrap gifts were traditional, but this felt like something more. Something too precious. But before she could speak, Bogart was already walking away, raising one hand in a casual wave without looking back. "See you at the premiere, kid. You're going to knock 'em dead." And then he was gone, disappearing into the crowd of crew members who were already dismantling the set, taking apart the world they had built together. Audrey waited until she was home that evening, in her small apartment with the windows open and the sounds of Los Angeles drifting up from the street below, to open the box. Inside was a simple gold bracelet, delicate and elegant, exactly her taste, and attached to the bracelet was a small charm in the shape of a bench. The card that accompanied it read, "For the days when you need a place to sit, remember, you are never alone. Bogey." She put on the bracelet immediately. She would wear it for years, through films and marriages and triumphs and losses. It would become one of her most treasured possessions, not because of its value, but because of what it represented. A moment of connection between two unlikely souls, a friendship forged in the fire of creation, a reminder that kindness, true, unexpected, unconditional kindness, could change everything. Chapter 6. Sabrina premiered in September of 1954. The reviews were mixed. Critics praised the performances, but quibbled about the tone, about the age difference between the leads, about Billy Wilder's uncharacteristic sentimentality. But audiences loved it. They flocked to theaters, drawn by the magic of seeing Audrey Hepburn and Humphrey Bogart together on screen. What they saw was chemistry, not the romantic kind, but something rarer. They saw two actors who understood each other, who trusted each other, who brought out unexpected dimensions in each other's performances. The scenes between Audrey and Bogart crackled with an energy that transcended the script. There was depth there, complexity, a sense of two real people connecting beneath the surface of their characters. The premiere itself was a grand affair, held at the Paramount Theatre with all the glitter and glamour that Hollywood could muster. Audrey arrived in a Givenchy gown that would become iconic. Bogart arrived in a tuxedo that he complained about for the entire evening, but when they saw each other in the lobby, their faces lit up with genuine pleasure. "You clean up nice, kid," Bogart said, taking her hand and spinning her in a slow circle. "You too, Mr. Bogart," she replied, laughing. "Call me Bogey," he said. "After everything, I think you've earned it." They sat together during the screening, Audrey between Bogart and Lauren Bacall, her hand occasionally reaching for the gold bracelet on her wrist when the emotions on screen became too intense. When the credits rolled and the applause began, she turned to find Bogart watching her with something like pride. "Not bad, kid," he said. "Not bad at all." The years that followed carried them in different directions. Audrey became one of the most beloved actresses in the world, her face gracing magazine covers, her performances earning accolades and adoration. She married, divorced, married again. She became a mother. She eventually stepped away from Hollywood to focus on humanitarian work, lending her fame to causes that mattered more to her than any role. Bogart continued to work, delivering some of the finest performances of his career. But his health began to decline. The years of smoking, of hard living, of pushing his body beyond its limits, they began to take their toll. In January of 1957, he passed away from cancer. He was 57 years old. Audrey was in Europe when she received the news. She was on location for another film, surrounded by people who did not know the history she shared with the man who had just died. She excused herself, walked to her trailer and closed the door. She sat there for a long time, holding the gold bracelet with its bench charm, remembering the day he had sat down beside her on that wooden crate, remembering the feel of his handkerchief pressed against her face, remembering his voice, rough and kind, telling her that she was not alone. She cried that day, not silently as she had cried on the Sabrina set, but openly, freely, honoring the grief that came with losing someone who had seen her at her most vulnerable and had stayed anyway. She wrote a letter to Lauren Bacall, expressing her condolences, sharing her memories, trying to put into words what Bogart had meant to her. Bacall wrote back, equally gracious, equally moved. They would remain friends for the rest of their lives. At Bogart's memorial service, a simple affair attended by close friends and family, Audrey was not present in body, but she was present in spirit. And when she returned to the United States months later, she made a private pilgrimage to his gravesite. She stood there for a long time, looking at the stone that bore his name, thinking about all the things she wished she had said, all the gratitude she had not adequately expressed. Finally she spoke. "You told me once that when someone is hurting, you show up," she said. "You just show up, and that's what you did for me. You showed up when I needed it most. You saw me when I felt invisible. You held space for me when I could not hold space for myself." She paused, wiping tears from her eyes. "I've thought about that day 1,000 times. The day you sat down beside me and said nothing. The day you handed me your handkerchief and let me cry without asking why. It was such a small thing, such a simple thing, but it changed everything." She touched the bracelet on her wrist. "I've tried to do the same for others. Tried to show up when people are hurting. Tried to sit with them in the dark without needing to fix anything. And every time I do, I think of you. Every time I offer kindness without expectation, I hear your voice telling me that's what you do. You just show up." She knelt down and placed a single white rose at the base of his headstone. "Thank you, Bogey, for being my friend, for teaching me that strength is not about never breaking, for reminding me that I was never alone." She stood, took a deep breath, and looked up at the sky. "They don't make men like you anymore," she whispered. "But because of you, I've tried to be the kind of woman who deserves to have known you." She walked away, and she did not look back. But the bracelet remained on her wrist, the handkerchief remained in her possession, and the lessons she had learned from Humphrey Bogart about kindness, about strength, about the profound power of simply showing up, remained in her heart for the rest of her life. Audrey Hepburn passed away in January of 1993 at the age of 63. Among her possessions, carefully preserved, were the handkerchief and the bracelet that Bogart had given her nearly 40 years before. Her family found them in a small box, along with the notes he had written and the photographs from the Sabrina set. They understood, without being told, that these objects represented something precious, a friendship that had transcended the superficiality of Hollywood, a connection between two souls who had recognized each other in the midst of chaos and confusion. Audrey's legacy extended far beyond her films. She was remembered as a humanitarian, an advocate for children, a woman who used her fame to shine light on suffering and injustice. But those who knew her best, those who had been lucky enough to witness her private moments of kindness, understood that she had learned those lessons long ago. She had learned them on a Hollywood backlot, from a gruff man with a cigarette and a handkerchief. She had learned them in the silence between two people who understood that sometimes presence is enough. She had learned them from Humphrey Bogart, who had taught her that the greatest strength is not the ability to endure pain alone, but the willingness to let someone sit with you while you heal. And that is the story of an October afternoon when a young woman cried in silence and an unlikely friend showed her that she was not alone. The story of a friendship that changed two lives and left a legacy of kindness that continues to inspire. On the set of Sabrina, Audrey Hepburn cried in silence, and Humphrey Bogart's reaction stunned everyone present, not because he was harsh, not because he was indifferent, but because he was kind. And in a world that so often rewards hardness over humanity, his kindness was the most stunning thing of all. If you watch this far, it is because this story touched something inside you. It is because you understand what it means to need someone to sit with you in the dark. Leave a comment saying, "I watched this far, so I can get to know you, so I can know who really appreciates the stories on this channel." If this story moved you, if it reminded you of someone who showed up for you when you needed it most, share it with them. Let them know they matter. Let them know they made a difference. And if you have not yet subscribed, this is your invitation. Subscribe now, because stories like this, stories of quiet heroism, of unexpected kindness, of human connection that transcends fame and fortune, these stories need to be told. And you deserve to hear them. Hit the like button if you believe that kindness still matters. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. And remember, always remember, that the greatest thing you can do for another person is simply show up. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. Thank you for believing that stories like this still have the power to change hearts. Until next time, they don't make them like Humphrey Bogart anymore. But because of stories like this, we remember, and in remembering, we carry his kindness forward.